You ever sat down as a trainee or developmental and you're doing your darndest to get the sector under control, get the big picture of what is going on inside your airspace, and your trainer tells you to scan and scan, and you are wondering what does that mean? So you just start looking arbitrarily out in directions. You look at the A side, you look at your friend on the R side, you look at the strips, you look at the clock, you look at the radar, back at your friend, at the supervisor, at your trainer who's really disgruntled that you're not scanning with a purpose. You look at the strips again, and then you look back at the radar, and then you look at the clock, and then you're just hoping that it's almost time for the session to be over because you have no idea what exactly you are scanning for, especially those situations where there's something pending, whether you missed a small detail or something is brewing up, there's a conflict happening, and you are just in a state of paralysis and you have no idea of the peril that is pending because you don't see it. And it's terrible because sometimes everybody else in the sector, including the A side, you as the D side, because this is what we're talking about here on the R side, and your trainer and the supervisor and the two other people that are watching and the janitor, everybody knows what the conflict is but you, and it's terrible. And it's just the stuff nightmares are made of. So today, we are going to help you alleviate that situation. This presentation, like I said, is aimed at the D side trainee, scanning with a purpose. As the D side, you have so much information that you are in control of. You are the master of the sector. You truly are. You have the greatest big picture visualization of what is going in and out of the airspace, and you are that gatekeeper. You are that protector. So today's presentation, a more perfect scan. And we are pursuing happiness, scanning with a purpose, and finding control in the modern world, if there is such a thing. But we always aim to achieve the impossible, because even if we fall short, we land among the stars, just like the, poster says. So it's going to be really fun. We are going to teach you how to look at every element with a sense of purpose. What all do you have in front of you to make your decisions and to understand your priorities, understand your duties, understand what you have to do to get your job done. And we are going to take a look at those tools and just dive into it. Some of it will be a review, some of the things you might already know, some of the things you won't, and we'll end up at a sector and we will reconcile the strips with the targets on the radar scope, looking at the clock, frozen in time, but nonetheless giving you an idea of what things look like and how the narrative of the sector is different with the strips, what's going on in the scope. But you're able to reconcile that narrative and to actually make it one consistent, great story, one worthy of J.D. Salinger, a great American, or in this case, a great Puerto Rican novel. So I will see you at the next slide. Really excited here, Steve. Let's get at it, man. I'll see you at the next slide. Spinning at the Boundary is a wonderful air traffic control book if you ever want to read up on somebody's firsthand experience in the field. And it also happens to be the title of today's bulleted list. So what are we doing? Well, we're scanning the radar display with purpose. As I described, that terrible, nightmarish situation where you're scanning, looking like a dog watching TV. Well, we're going to make you some super intelligent dog that watches TV and can extrapolate what exactly is going on. So we are going to make you feel confident looking at the radar scope with a purpose, and with the time and attention that you looked at the radar scope, you are going to get something beneficial out of that time. Because as we know, as a D side, your time is so valuable. Your time, your valuable time in the sector is measured in seconds. There's no question about it. Learning how to reconcile, account, and correlate each strip with a data block and vice versa. So one of the things we're going to take a look at today is, well, looking at the strips and taking a look at the radar display and reconciling that, pairing each target with a strip. But also, too, a quick look at the radar scope without even taking a look at the strips and seeing what exactly may or may not need done. And what I mean by that, I'll show you in one of the slides. It's going to be interesting, but almost doing things in reverse. Now, naturally, we'd always want you to take a look at the strips and take a look at the scope and say, okay, what do I have to do? Because both things tell a story. The radar is saying, hey, this is exactly what is going on now in the sector. And the strips are like, this is what is coordinated. This is what, if you have been updating your strips accordingly with the radar and coordination, This is showing you what should be going on. And then you can, like I said, reconcile that. Quick look in the scope and seeing what's pending, independent of looking at the strip A, like I just said, drawing your own conclusions, projecting and looking for work to help the sector out. Once you see that everything is copacetic, as a friend of mine's favorite word choice is to describe the sector, you can then move on and take on more duties and be able to help out a little bit more. So off to the sector. Ready, set, jets, go. I'm excited. We're really going to dive into this. So let's take a look at our first visual aid. I will see you at the sector. So I really didn't lie. We are not at a sector yet. We see 2 flight progress strips in front of us. And as our friend Chubbs from Happy Gilmore would say, it's all in the strips, right? Yeah, exactly. Great relevant example there. So you might be thinking to yourself, hey, Steve, I know what flight progress strips are, and I know how to use them. And I would agree with you. I'm sure you do. You've made it this far, maybe as an A side, taking a look at what is going on. But as we know, sometimes we fall into the complacent kind of, this is my job, I am programmed to do this kind of robotic, methodical thing, and we don't really look at it critically. So I figured it would be a great time for us to explore the flight progress strip in a little bit of detail to help you look at it, almost quick look it with a sense of purpose. So what do I mean by that? Well, we want to see what's in box 11. This is taken for granted. There's some givens here that you understand what every other element means. By this point, I'm sure you do. We are reviewing what exactly you'll be looking at as a purpose as a D side. So the previous fix, box 11. Sometimes it's useful, sometimes it is not. As you see, box 11 in the first example is the previous fix from our posted fix, moving in a direction that is getting closer to the boundary, leaving our airspace, if that makes sense. If you were to follow green 633 logically, you would see how that does make sense. St. Croix, Dandy, Gabar, going eastbound. So I really don't care about that. Now, in this particular example, you might want to give it some credence. St. Croix is actually the name of the bay, but we know the fixed posting for any aircraft on green 633 is at Dandy. So you see why having that St. Croix might help you out with additional traffic search if this aircraft were overflying, not landing St. Kitts, because that aircraft will be below. But if this aircraft was flying high and you had additional aircraft in the St. Croix Bay, you would see how useful it would be to still have St. Croix in the mix in this particular example. Now, as we see in the second example, the previous fix is important to us because look, it states the boundary fix. And as you know, as a D sign in D2 and D8, you are worried and focused on everything related to the boundary. That's your area of expertise. That's what you take care of. You are in charge of the boundary. You take boundary estimates, you give boundary estimates. You make amendments according to information given to you by our foreign facilities that we share a common boundary with. So there, you see something valuable. So sometimes when you're quick scanning, your eyes will want to fixate to there to get a good idea. And from that time, you can take a look at the clock, and then you can look at the radar, and there you complete the entire picture. And as you see, if you can visualize this in the 3 dimensions that we work with, you'll get a good idea of where the aircraft should be. And if the aircraft is not there, well, then you follow due process and go through and do some fact finding about this particular aircraft. Perfect. Box 19, the fix, or the fixed posting, or the posted fix. As you see, green 633 is our example today. Dandy is the fix. You would use St. Croix, Porquet, some cases, a beam Porquet, a Porquet fixed radial distance, sometimes Liu, sometimes Papa Juliet Mike, the Princess Juliana VOR. And that is exactly how, when we use strips, traffic is assembled and posted to help you find the conflicts. Because the logic is every aircraft that is transitioning the airspace will, at some point in time during their route of flight, pass the fix that is in the middle in box 19. That means at some point in time, Any traffic can be collected and located around that fix, so it serves as a central point of reference. So Dandy is kind of near St. Croix, and you have the luxury of having St. Croix somewhere in the ticket as well in this particular example. But as you know, it kind of just describes what all is going around St. Croix at this time. St. Croix is the focal point of the sector. And more often than not, that's how sectors get their name. If they're not numbered, they usually have a name, and it's because there is a fix or a nav aid that kind of has all the airways going through it. Now we've kind of moved far away from that with Metroplex and random navigational airways, RNAV airways, and random routes and impromptu routes, but still we kind of group traffic all around the fixes that the fix posting is titled as, in this case St. Croix and Dandy in this particular example. Even on random routes, we've been over this before, how the computer will always try to give you a strip that will at least explain somewhere near the posted fix. So that's important. It gives you an idea of centrally where this aircraft will pass through the meat and potatoes of the sector. Now our last example here in this particular example and on this page is box 21. The next fix, posted fix or coordination fix. So this is exactly important for the opposite reason of box 11. If you're thinking about the aircraft moving three-dimensionally by taking a look at this picture, I guess maybe 4 dimensions if you add time in there as well, you'll see how it is very useful on test 333. This aircraft is going eastbound, and our job, yet again, reminding ourselves we are a boundary kind of mindset when we control traffic as the D side. We are worried about this time right here, this Gabar time. This is where we are worried about coordinating. This is our coordination fix with St. Kitts or VC Bird or PRCO. And this is what we're worried about. We would like to know what time the aircraft is estimating over Gabar as they make their way east in this particular example. As you see here, St. Croix, as has just been reversed, is the next fix, but this aircraft is actually going this way as well. Gabar, Dandy, St. Croix. We can think about it following it along those fixes. We know this aircraft is going westbound, and St. Croix is not incredibly important to us. We did our traffic search at Gabar and Dandy, and that is how notice how these times are the ones that are most useful and prudent to us. Same thing here. Dandy is very important for us for a traffic search, but Gabar is important to us because it makes up the boundary time. So you see how the strips have times and fixes associated with them that are most useful. Whereas sometimes strips, we really don't care what time they pass in a beam point or a fixed radial distance or a fix altogether because the aircraft is staying within radar and we really don't protect non-radar for that aircraft. But you see how a quick look, when you sit down and you take a look at the strips, seeing what needs offset, you can immediately fixate your eyes thinking in the dimensions that we talked about, time and space, that we can immediately figure out what needs to be done with the times and what to look for if the aircraft are in this sector. We look at the time, hey, is it past 1637? This aircraft should be radar identified. Okay, it's 1637. This aircraft should be somewhere near Dandy. You see how you're able to immediately look at the time on the strip, look at the current time, and you will be able to reconcile that with the strips immediately. And that's obviously under the assertion that you have good information going into it, which we know sometimes that always isn't the case because these facilities that we coordinate with, sometimes they don't have radar, they don't have a automation system to calculate times, and their estimates are sometimes not the best because of the inputs, whether they're doing estimates or the aircraft are already airborne or they're still on the ground. There's a whole bunch of possibilities. The assumed departure times are off, so don't worry yourself too much about that. Just take a look at the strips and realize that they are a useful tool when you are quick looking. Now, remember that you would want to go over in detail and make sure everything else is correct, but if you are trying to figure out what the situation is with stuff coming in and stuff going out, you look and fixate your eyes and your scan on those fixes almost immediately. So, good tool, good review. Let's move on. Now look at here, some kind of laser show and some awesome colors and stuff like that. It looks like a mumbled mess, but there is some logic to this. So As you know, today we are focusing on the D2, D8 operation. So you sit down in the chair and you're plugged in and you want to take a look at the radar and look at it with a sense of purpose. So as you see, we don't have no strips here. Strips are gone for the time being, but it's purely a radar environment. Now, what do the lines mean? Assuming that all boundary fixes from as far north as Ilopo in Sector 2, making its way clockwise, going west and south to Scapa, those are all manually coordinated facilities, right? We manually coordinate with those facilities. We manually coordinate the aircraft with that boundary, time, and estimate and altitude. So you see here, if we were to plot, taking a look at the line here, turbojets from Slugo, that's basically 15 minutes out. Turboprops, that's 15 minutes out. So somewhere right along the eastern edge of the island of Puerto Rico, you want to make sure that if you look and you see aircraft on Yankee 290 or Yankee 355 or direct Slugo, that those aircraft are coordinated. That is an immediately telltale sign. If you have aircraft before this boundary, you still have time to work with, roughly. But it needs to be done. You want to do it with a sense of urgency. Turboprops right around here. So if you look and you see if these aircraft are kind of around that, coast of Puerto Rico, the East Coast, you want to get that done. Now, these plotted lines, this orange line, turbojets, that's about 15 minutes out from turbojets. So thinking of it that way, using 8 miles a minute, you know that you have some time. And if you want to make a broad generalization, you have about the south coast of Puerto Rico here, and just east of St. Croix and southeast of St. Croix for your turbojets to get to the fixes Gabar, Modix, Hillary, GC, and Nada. You have time, but not the most time, no time to dilly-dally. This is you looking at the scope and hoping that if you see aircraft near or past these points, that they are already coordinated. And if not, well, then that's your cue to look at the strips and say, hey, this is my priority. That's how you determine them. You don't really have to always look at one thing in particular. You are allowed to use the clock, the strips, and the radar to make your control decisions and determine your priorities here. And as you see, the pink line is for turboprops. So you have turboprops and props that are going around 5 miles, 4.5 miles a minute. You want to make sure that they are coordinated, or you are starting the coordination process prior to them crossing this line. And I understand, you take a look at this, it's not even to scale, it's a rough estimate, assuming aircraft are going 8 miles a minute, 5 miles a minute, and right around 4 for those slower turboprops. But you can visualize it. You can find these fixes and transpose this map, close your eyes, and say, hey, I know that this aircraft is here. I hope it is done. And you take a look, and you look at the strip. It's easy that way. Now we are going to bring the two together, but just think of it this way. You have time. If the aircraft is over the bulk of the island of Puerto Rico, you can't go wrong. You have time to coordinate this stuff. Radar to radar with Santo Domingo, that's good. The LOA says the handoff has to be done 10 miles prior to the boundary, so there's none even to draw anything. You can get that done right away. And we don't have any Santo Domingo examples today because that's how easy it is. But this stuff, you can visualize and understand and look at the scope with a purpose and knowing how far these aircraft are from their boundaries. You see Slugo is a unique example. Dandy would be one too if we did that. As you see, it's not really listed there, but most of the fixes here, if they're still over the island chain of the U.S. and BVIs and Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands, you have time to do it. But just remember, this is what this little visualization looks like. Let's keep moving. Let's move on to the next element in today's presentation, bringing this all together and seeing what it means. Awesome. I will see you at the next slide. As you see, we are back at the sector. Both elements of the radar scope and the strip bay are here. So as you see, we have the all-inclusive elements of what we need and what we are equipped with to get the job done. You see that we have aircraft entering the sector from both directions, both from the northwest and from the southeast. How exciting is that? And this proves to be an opportunity for us to use the skills we just talked about. Now, if you want to be the best radar associate as you can be, you would be monitoring the R side, sitting down, and understanding that you might have work to do. Visualizing what we would like to have done by those lines that we drew and plotted on the radar, with aircraft being 15 minutes out from the boundary, turboprops and turbojets respectively, and then reconciling that with what we have going on here in our strip bays, we will be able to get the job done rather efficiently. As a technique, where you start your scan as a radar associate, it's up to you. I would usually start it somewhere and make somewhere a geographical position and try to make it either clockwise or counterclockwise, or directions of the compass arrow, whatever you want to do. Now, we do have pending work to do. As you see, there were not a lot of things coordinated here. There's one thing coordinated, windward 808, and you probably have a couple things to coordinate, but the point being is that you have time. The current time is 2003. It's always good to have a reference point of what time it is. That is lesson one, what you want to scan for, to understand what actually needs to be done. Now, if you find yourself in a position to help the radar, by all means. Let's start here. Let's start at the south. 6421 GC. I know I'm going to look in the last scanner bay, and I see that says 08707. They have not called us yet, but I can tell that being the case because there's no check mark to see if they're on frequency. There's no check mark by the altitude for a mode C validation, and there's no R for radar. So, hey, are you talking to that guy? Something you would say to the radar controller. Or do you need to call PRCO and say, PRCO, request communications is 08707. You see how you're able to scan with a purpose, take the information, what you saw in the scope, reconcile with the strip, and immediately notice that there are some things missing. So let's keep moving on. Let's go north. Let's go counterclockwise here. I see an aircraft approaching Hillary 3322 F320. Immediately you should be able to understand, you know where Hillary's at this point, and you understand that that's what a target looks like in micro ERs. That's what a non-correlated data block looks like, a mode C intruder. And look, you can immediately deduce, look, Delta 349 was coordinated to beam Hillary, but oh, you see, if you look at things critically, 34 is still listed as the assigned altitude, and whereas clearly you see that the target is at 32. And you see that the deviation was approved, 15 nautical miles north of Coney when able, and squawking that. Yet again, this is an opportunity for you to reach out, call PRCO, might be a little too late. Say, hey, this aircraft is at 32, what do you show them coordinated at? Or say 32 is approved. Or you can look at the strips from the activation strip and see if it was in fact 32, what was coordinated, you just forgot to put it in there. But yet again, you see how you're able to reconcile immediately what exactly is going on. And you see how the time, it being the current time, is going to correlate with aircraft entering the sector from the southeast, that the time that they are estimating the boundary is going to be in box 11. So very useful for you. Moving on, Wiggins 8104. Now you're like, man, where is this guy? And yes, that's very true. And it does not immediately correlate because, hey, it's the current time and he just crossed the boundary. But this aircraft is not nearly as fast as some of the aircraft that we just talked about in the previous example. You're talking about a turbojet here for the the Delta, and a turbojet for the Azul. But this Wiggins 8104 is really slow. And now you're thinking to yourself, okay, if box 11 is not helpful, well, will box 19 be helpful? And it kind of will, but this aircraft is so slow entering the airspace roughly 11 minutes ago, and they won't even be at St. Croix for about another almost a half hour. So the idea is this aircraft is slow, so you see how its position is skewed because we are not listing the times by boundary time, because then they would be closer to down here. They'd be the first trip. But no, despite the fact that they were the first aircraft in the sector before all of these strips got added, they are way up here. And that will sometimes annoy you when you are looking to pull deadwood or pulling the strips that are no longer needed for control purposes, and you are going to be able to purge a whole bunch of aircraft from the sector, really clean it up, and you'll get almost carried away and say, oh, this aircraft must be gone. They entered the airspace at 1949. Well, no, if you look at the You look at the ground speed, or you just look at the time they entered, or the fixed posting and the time between that, and how much time they still have yet to fly through the airspace. If you follow the strip completely, you'll notice this is a slow aircraft, and they are going to be in the sector for quite some time. So this aircraft still has considerable ways to fly before they're even handed off to the R5 controller. Awesome. Islandways 632, another example. Look, they just crossed the boundary now. Islandways 632, Islandways 632, yet again. They're at the top of the, oh, and excuse me, I did forget to address, well, no, never mind, we're going in direction here. So Islandways 632, you're looking at that and you see, oh, I see 1948, 200, something's wrong here. And here brings another lesson. At some point in time, VC Bird must have re-coordinated a 20-minute time revision. And sure enough, you probably approved it. Said Elopo now 200, flight level 160 is approved, but you forgot to carry your plus times. And as you see, this greatly disrupts where this aircraft falls in line in the sector if we are doing it by the fixed posting. This time is 20 minutes time change, so this time should reflect it as well. And you see how if we carry the times over and even enter it into the NAS, 2008 would put this aircraft down here. Still in correct time sequence, but still very much so off, and it could affect separation. If you did have an aircraft south westbound on Mike 576 at this altitude is not really the case, but all I'm saying is the idea that you can see how if you don't revise your times and keep everything update, that garbage in, garbage out, you will be lost and kind of looking for, hey, what exactly is going on here? So something else to keep in mind. Delta 919. Nice thing about Princess Juliana departures, if you are looking at the scope with a purpose, as we have kind of been beating to a dead horse, you see that aircraft is obviously a Princess Juliana departure. You know, in the bay, they go right below. Perfect. Moving on to Mountain 8105, Mountain 8105. Yet again, with the slow progress of the aircraft, you can see that they are kind of in the mix with all the current traffic that is around the St. Croix area. St. Croix, Liu, Dandy, Porquet fixed radio distances, fixed radio distance off St. Croix, Princess Juliana. You see how all this is kind of grouped in the same geographical area. But the idea that this aircraft is slow moving, they are in the mix with all of our traffic, but this aircraft still has a considerable distance to fly inside the sector until they leave the sector. Because if you look at St. Croix, they're 5 minutes in the picture with everybody. That's awesome. We are getting a great description of a point in time of all the aircraft inside the sector. But that idea with aircraft having different characteristics diminishes as they make their way along their route of flight. In this case, southeast bound, the VC Bird on green 633. JetBlue 385 and American 2295. How wonderful is that? Look, JetBlue 385 at 35, perfect. American 2295 at 330, perfect as well. Yet again, around the current time, they are all estimating the St. Croix fixed radial distance at those times, which is fine. The St. Croix fixed radial distance are kind of far away and they have some flying to do until they reach the estimate. So you are getting close to the time where you would have to coordinate these two aircraft respectively to fall in line with the PRCO and San Juan letter of agreement. Yet again, this would be an opportunity for you to practice now. If you'd like to pause it, offset the strips and follow through with the coordination, feel free to do so. Now, let's go Spirit Wings 101. Yet again, falling in line. Remember that the east coast of the island of Puerto Rico is like our 15-minute mark for aircraft going to Slugo. So you have time. Take a look at the aircraft. If you're able to get the time, offset it and know this is something you'd like to do within the hour and coordinate accordingly. No problem there. And you see they are on frequency and they are very much radar identified. Our last example, Delta 722, if you follow down in line, look at this. They're on frequency, radar. But there's no check mark on the altitude. And look at this, 33, and immediately you look 34, knowing they're going to have to be at an even altitude as per our letter of agreement with Curacao Center. This is an opportunity for you to fix this stuff with a purpose while helping your radar controller teammate out. And if you look in the Alaska Interbay, you had the continuation strip of Azul 8707. And upon radar identification, as soon as you get Azul 8707 on frequency and everybody is radar identified and known in the sector, you can pull this one down and mark this one up. And now you have one less strip to scan for in your bay. Now, taking a look at the reverse order of this, American 1293 starting in the St. Croix Bay. Now we're going strip to radar. American 1293. Where is this aircraft? 1958, 1959. I know it's 200. Why am I not talking to this aircraft yet? But if you look at the scope with a purpose, you would see, look at this G tag off of St. Croix. That's probably American 1293. You can ask your radar controller to quick look it or click on the target, slew and enter on it, and you would see a full data block, American 1293, on preferential routing. Not yet a radar identified or talking to us yet necessarily, probably talking to the satellite controller, no doubt. Moving up, Delta 919. You knew that you cleared this aircraft with proposal time of 2002, climbing to 15. You see what time it is, and it correlates. It works out. Now, this is an ideal situation. This will not always work out. You'll look at the clock, and you'll look at the time you granted the clearance to Princess Juliana, and they are very much so different. And that requires you, unfortunately, to play policeman or policewoman and say, hey, I have to call Juliana and say, hey, Juliana, where is this guy? So it worked out this time, but it won't always be like that, but just something to scan for. Moving on, ILA 632, we kind of talked about how we kind of messed up and did not forward our plus times, but now with the correct one estimate time that we all thought was the most important thing in the world at the time, which is very true. That's important. Good job copying down the new Elopo time and improving it because it proves to be accurate. But if this aircraft were to have traffic in the Princess Juliana area, and like I said, garbage in, garbage out, if you don't have a good Papa Juliet Mike time, a good St. Martin time, then that old time that we crossed out, that we replaced with the good time, would be useless. It would not give you any kind of accurate information to traffic search for this particular aircraft. Non-radar, that is, for your Mike 576 folks, or even for your Juliana departures. This aircraft is outside Juliana's airspace only by 1,000 feet, but you would still want to know, hey, I have guys climbing at 15 out of Juliana. This guy's at 16. Got to watch out for that. Moving on, Delta 349. Yet again, I look at the time that I approved it, and I look at the time on the clock, and I'm like, okay, and I approved it, beam Hillary, and yet again, we talked about the 32, 34, and there's where we would go back, take a look, and reconcile it against the radar scope, and like, oh, there it is, okay, let me get on the phone to PRCO. American 2295, okay, they're somewhere in the sector, they're estimating 2026, oh, look, they're right there, they're not quite past St. Croix yet, okay, let me offset that. Where it should have been offset outside the hour anyways, but if you were sitting down and you were having to take control, those are some of the things you would consider. JetBlue 385, looking at it, the same time in the fixed posting as American 2295. Great that it's a different altitude, but you know they should be somewhere close to their general position, which they are. Maybe the R6 or R4 controller gave them direct Hillary, so they're not exactly over the same position. Windward 808, how wonderful is this? Coordinated just southwest of Porquet. They already got their altitude restriction and it's been coordinated. Everything seems to be wonderful. Just monitor and just make sure that time is accurate. Looking at Spirit Wings 101 Slugo, you still have some time from the current time to coordinate with Juliana. And if you look, you know that they are somewhere northwest of Slugo at this time because it is still a considerable amount of time before they're even near Slugo. So you can deduce and look with a sense of purpose, say, hey, they must be somewhere up here in the Yankee 290 area between Beano and Jet. Mountain 8105, you see the Dandy time, the St. Croix time. You're looking, okay, where is this aircraft? So look at St. Croix, you look at all the times that you have before you. Oh, look, that aircraft is somewhere around St. Croix, probably preceding direct Dandy. How wonderful. Wiggins 8104, just talking about that. We've been talking to this aircraft and it's been radar identified for a considerable amount of time now. They are not estimating St. Croix until, well, pretty long time from current time. So this might be the one where it's hard to find. Okay, they are almost 10 minutes inside our airspace or 11 minutes inside our airspace. Ah, there they are. And that's how you do that. You have to kind of deduce it and kind of project where these aircraft would be. So that finishes St. Croix Bay as OED 707 in the Berinken Bay. As we talked about before, you don't know about this aircraft yet. Just pretend we didn't mark it up, and you're like, okay, I can't touch that particular aircraft. And boom, you go to the one in the Alaska Bay as OED 707 GC at 1956 is 2003. They should be 4 minutes inside our airspace, and you immediately now look at the radar scope like, oh, well, that must be him. I mean, we'll find out to be positive, but you can definitely assume that that aircraft is a ZOAD 707 and know that you might have to reach out to PRCO Center to get the information. And yet again, Delta 722, a more useful ticket that the previous controller probably already tore down would be the VACHI ticket on Lima 455 going southbound, but that ticket does not exist no more. It's gone. You're left with this. And then as wonderful as a controller you were when we went through the first round and the first initial order, you fixed the 34, but you would say, okay, Delta 722 conveys Apache 2001. Ah, I still have that available to me. So he must be somewhere in the Berinken, Vachi, Mayaguez area. And sure enough, that's exactly where the aircraft is at. So you see how you're able to find a time, pair it with the current time, and get an idea of where these aircraft will be on the scope. Now this takes a little bit of effort for you to become familiar of quick looking the radar and quick looking the strips and staying focused on what exactly you are looking for. But I have no faith that you'll be able to do it because you'll be able to scan and visualize where these aircraft are in a particular point of space and time. And you'll know that you would have to coordinate this aircraft. You still have 22 minutes to do so, and now you have a good altitude as well. So you see how we were able to do that? We did it in one order. We looked at the radar scope immediately and reconciled it with the strips in the strip bay, and then we paused and we went with the strip bay first and correlated it with the targets on the radar scope using everything we had available to us, the strips, the radar targets, the position of the targets on the radar scope, and the clock to determine what needs to be done and what needs to be coordinated and where these aircraft are at in this point in time. Now, obviously, we had a conversation about it, and it took us a little bit long as per the slide, but this is how we're learning. But you see how you'll be able to do this once you perfect your scan and your correlation. You'll be able to get this done in no time and have an idea of not only of where the aircraft are at in your domain, the strips, that's your domain, that's your castle, but you'll be able to see what's going on in somebody else's domain and be united and form an alliance and just be an awesome kingdom altogether once you get things sorted out with them. And it's beautiful how it's able to work out. And you see, if anything is off, it is impossible to miss. As you see, Azul's not talking to us yet. Delta's probably at a different altitude. Luckily, Delta 919 showed up on time, but that would be a case for us to say, hey, Juliana, where is this guy? And IMOA 632, something's off with the times here. And you're like, oh, I didn't forward my plus times. And you would also see that you have this departure ticket given to you by the A side, and you posted it, but you're like, where is this guy? Well, just wait. He's not in the vertical confines of our airspace yet. So there it is, no stone left unturned, paying attention to detail, going over, being a good investigator, and making sure everybody is doing what they're supposed to be doing because you are correlating what they are doing on the radar scope, their track, their speed, their altitude, and making sure that that all jives with the information that you have available to you on the strips. This is how you keep custody of flight information. That's it. We don't have EDST. We don't have ERAM to probe and to keep track of aircraft in the sector for us. We have strip bays, and they do a really, really good job, antiquated nonetheless, but a very good job of performing their task exceedingly well, keeping traffic in a common area for us to look at and find conflicts with. So, wonderful job with that. I know it wasn't the most interesting subject matter today, but it's an idea to get you motivated and to think about how will I scan for aircraft when the time comes in my training, when I've mastered the skills, the fundamentals enough to start looking at finding a technique, to scan the radar with a purpose, to move on to that next step? Well, you will find it here. So great job with that. Let's go to the last slide for a send-off. Happy that you guys were here to enjoy this with me. Good catch, good scan. Look at that awesome noise aircraft there over the wonderful north side of the island of Puerto Rico over the Atlantic Ocean, landing San Juan. And it's kind of like the Where's Waldo, like, hey, there's an airplane there and I'm scanning. And if you were a tower controller, great job finding it. It'd be fun if you were in a tower cab and you're like, hey, where's this aircraft at? Well, I see him. Well, there you go. It's just a different kind of scan. You just happen to be scanning strip boards and PVD radar scope, which is fine. Wonderful job today. Like I said in the last slide, wasn't the most instrumental or most fundamental here, but we finally took a dive into sparking off some techniques on what you might want to use to get the job done inside the sector. So I'm really happy that you joined me today. I always enjoyed this time we spend together. Yet again, we shift around from a radar presentation to a D-side presentation, but this could be helpful for radar trainees too, to get that scan down, to reconcile, correlate, and make sure everything is absolutely wonderful for your session. And you'll be so thankful that you took the time and you were very technical and methodical about it, going over each position of the targets, because it will surely be a good input to have a great result of your training session or your scenario session downstairs in the lab, or just a session you run as a certified controller. You will be happy that you go over things in a methodical way to get the job done and keep everybody safe, in the know. Information and knowledge is power, all that wonderful motivational speaker stuff that we kind of talk about here in these presentations. Wonderful job. Thanks for spending the time with me today. I cannot be more thankful. I hope everybody is well. Remember to keep your attitudes just like your separation positive. Steve here. I will see you at the next presentation. Bye now.